I try to be well informed on things, but he's always able to one-up me on every topic. Today, for example, he told me that we were talking about maple syrup at Tesco's, and he said that Quebec is the Saudi Arabia of maple syrup, in that they hold huge stockpiles which they release at their own preferred rate in order to control the price.
But I only know that because our local producers are always complaining about the price.
Of course.
Yes. Well,
we learn from many sources.
Okay. Okay.
Besides being the mayor of Trumansburg, New York, John is also a well-known computer expert. He was well known to me in 1970 when I dropped by a certain computer club and immediately said, I got to hang around this guy because this was where I would find things out without having to deal with very pompous computer scientists, etc. And since then he's gone on to, he edits the Journal of C Language Translation and has written numerous books such as on SED and AWK, and most famously Internet for Dummies, and more recently Spam Control for Dummies.
Fighting spam became for dummies.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is a member of the advisory board of ICANN, from which meeting he has just arrived. And so there is no one on the planet better able to tell us about Internet governance. Or I forget the exact title.
Or whatever it is I'm talking about. Yes, thank you. Well, I appreciate that talk and wish only that that introduction, and wish only that more of it were true. Yes, I'll see. Is my volume okay? All right. Actually, the ICANN meeting is next week, so a certain amount of what I will be telling you is my prediction about what they're going to be doing. But since the topic in general is Internet governance, I've attempted to organize my talk into 3.5 parts. And the first part is, why does the Internet need governing? And I want to talk a little bit about some of the technical aspects that require coordination to make it work. Then the second part is to talk about what has actually happened with Internet governance. The third part is to talk about what I think will happen in the future. And then the 3.5 part is, after I've talked all of this about what's actually happening inside the Internet, is to step back a little bit and say there's a lot of stuff happening sort of on the Internet, but not of the Internet, and what are the implications there. And my qualifications for that are that among the various things I do, I run a website called abuse.net, which it's a complaint forwarding service. If you have a complaint with if you get spam from somethingorother.com, I have a database full of suggested contact addresses that you could write to advise the people in charge of that domain that they have a problem to deal with. That's all it does. Nonetheless, based purely on the name of my website, thousands of people are sure that I personally am the network police. And if something is wrong, they can tell me, and I'll deal with it. And I have in fact, it happens enough that I have a canned message saying that I'm not the network police. There are no network police. And half the time that does it. And the other half the time they say, "Damn it, do your job." So, so I guess that a lot of what I'm talking about today is why it's not my job, and why to some extent it can't be anybody's job, but to the other extent that the network police are the same people as the regular police. So, rolling the clock back to 1980 or 81, when the research ARPANET turned into the Internet, there turned out to be two technical parts of the Internet that require coordination so that they work everywhere. One is the numeric IP addresses that every computer uses, and the other are the domain names. And it turns out that although they both need coordination, they are coordinated in opposite ways. IP addresses are like phone numbers. And the most important thing about phone numbers is that they're all different. And the reason they are different, I know all this because where I was last week was actually in Geneva at a meeting of the International Telecommunications Union. And I actually talked to the person who hands out country codes. Why is Britain 44 and France 33 and North America is 1? Well, it turns out there is an office run by a fellow named Richard who recommends country codes that the various national telephone companies all decide to use. And they aren't required to use it, but they've all decided it is in their own interest that if they use a consistent set of country codes, life will just be simpler. And you have a seat. And IP addresses on the Internet work pretty much the same way. there are two significant differences. One is that whereas phone numbers can be of varying lengths, IP addresses are all the same length. I mean, currently they're all 32 bits. And there is a tedious and controversial long-term probable evolution to what's called IPv6, which extends the phone numbers to make them longer, to make them 128 bits. And I will touch on that later, but that turns out not to be a big deal in the overall range of things. But what is required is that every network connected to the internet has to have a separate set of IP addresses. And the reason is that, for the same reason we all have to have different phone numbers. That, I mean, if they overlap, then you can't tell which ones they are. So how does this happen? Well, back in the good old days, there was another small, there was an equally small office called IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers something or other, which was run by one professor at the University of Southern California. And he basically handed out network numbers to anybody who needed them. And the number of networks connected to the internet was small, and that worked okay. And then he died prematurely, and then his office was then taken over by other local members of the staff, and they handed out network numbers for a while. And that worked fine until the size of the internet started to get big, and more and more networks started to say, we want our own network numbers, and now it was sort of a prestige thing to have your own network number. It's like having your own. I mean, I asked the fellow at the ITU, could I have my own country code? It can be a very long country code because I'm only planning to have 2 telephones, so I only need to add 1 digit at the end. And he said no, but apparently I was not the first person to ask. So, in the same way, the allocation of network numbers became an issue, and since they're fixed length, if they allocate, after a while they'll allocate them all and they'll run out. And this would be bad, because this would mean that no new networks could attach to the internet because they wouldn't have phone numbers. So through a complicated process of evolution, IANA has delegated the network numbering to what are called regional internet registries. The registry for this part of the world is called RIPE, which is a French acronym for European Registry. The acronym for North America is called ARIN, American Registry for Internet Numbers. The registry for Asia and the Pacific is called APNIC, Asia Pacific something something something. And for more political than technical reasons, last year they split off South America, so it has its own thing called LACNIC. And earlier this year, Africa now has its very own registry. So if you're an African network, you now apply to AFRINIC for your network numbers. And each of these work by, there's an application process. You have to justify the number of IP addresses that you need. If I wrote to them and said I need 1 million IP addresses, they would say no. Unless I could give them unless I could show them a business plan for a network that was going to need a million addresses. And if I give them a plausible business plan and I pay a fee because there's an application fee, then they would do it. And this works okay. Now, there's one important difference between this allocation scheme and the way that country codes are allocated, which is that these are regional. RIPE is one regional. RIPE is one agency, and it hands, and it doesn't matter whether you are in Ireland or in France or in Italy or in Israel, which is about as far east as it goes. RIPE allocates all of the network numbers, and this actually turns out to be good because there is a relatively little known limitation of the internet structure, which is that at the very largest networks, the college's network then connects to Janet, I guess, which then connects to various commercial providers. And where the very largest networks get together, the routers that route the internet traffic have to know where every single network in the world is. And the table in which they list all these network numbers, turn out to be a fixed size. It's very expensive to make them bigger. So there are currently, how many allocated networks? How many router? Let's see. The router tables currently have 165,000 network numbers announced for routing, and this number it's updated dynamically. So this is a snapshot as of Friday. This is a problem because a lot of the routers only have room for 100,000 entries. Now it turns out that by some processing on the data, they can actually squeeze this down to 80,000. Because it turns out that frequently that the same network will announce two adjacent network numbers, and they in fact can combine that into a single table entry. So we have 80,000 announced prefixes. Once we get to 100,000 announced prefixes, there's going to be great gnashing of teeth, because either it means that the high-end networks are going to have to buy a new round of more expensive routers, which they're not eager to do, because a high-end router is very expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or it means that they're going to have to start saying, well, we're not going to accept all of these network numbers that people are giving to us. We're going to have our own justification policy. And until now, the various networks have been happy to delegate the responsibility to Aaron and Apnick and all those people. And if they then have to say, well, even though you have a network from RIPE, we're not necessarily going to route it because we don't have room for it, and somehow we don't think that your network is as worthy as another one, and having to prove which networks are more worthy than others is just, it's a whole can of worms. So that we're hoping that we'll be able to finesse this somehow. And there is in technical circles, there is some effort to encourage networks to do some sort of internal reorganization to group their allocations into fewer, larger chunks that might hold this off. But in any event, for IP numbers, the situation is reasonably well under control. I mean, there is this issue of running out of the router tables, but it's a technical issue. It's not a political issue. It's only a political issue to the extent that if it happens, someone's going to pay for it, and everyone says, well, it wasn't me. I mean, the router makers would say, well, it's not, or the high-end networks are saying, well, we didn't ask for all those extra network numbers, and whoever the lucky winner is who announces the 100,000th and first network number is going to say, well, I didn't do anything different than all of those people did. So you can see this is a political problem to which, being a politician, I have no answer. So, and the various RIPE and its friends are supported by charging fees to people to whom they have allocated network numbers, and this works except for the swamp. There was a brief interval which I just missed out on by a few months, when you could write to, back when IANA was the one guy in California, when anybody could write to IANA and say, I'd like a little network, please, a little network number of my very own, and they handed out quite a few of those, hundreds, at least hundreds, maybe thousands, okay, and they didn't document them very well. So there are all these little networks in a chunk of the IP address space, which everybody calls the swamp. And the good thing about having a swamp network is that it's yours. And if you move from one ISP to another, you connect to them and you can say, well, I'm network such and such, and they say, oh yes, that's the swamp. That's okay. So it would mean that if currently my network is attached to an ISP in New York, and if I moved to California, if I moved here. If I had one of these nice old swamp allocations, I could say I'm going to keep the same network number. I do not. What I have is a sub-network of my provider's network. So if I moved, I'll have to change all my IP numbers, it's analogous to say if I move from New York to here, I got to change the phone numbers on all of my business cards, and I have to notify all of my correspondents. It's a pain in the neck. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's enough work that it's worth avoiding. And for the past 10 years, there have been efforts to clean up the swamp, and this swamp is very resistant to being drained. Furthermore, since it's not well documented, there's also a problem of IP range hijacking, in which people will take typically there are all these allocations from the early 1990s, which have just been sort of forgotten. And someone, most often a spammer, will just pick some allocation that hasn't been used and start using it, and then it's very difficult to trace down whose it is. Because if you look up, every allocation has some contact information attached to it, but frequently it's whatever they sent in 1993, and it's no longer accurate. So it makes it very hard to track down. There's also been some more debatable hijacking. I know one fellow in Boston who used to work for the Open Software Foundation, which is one of the many sort of evanescent nonprofit organizations through which the Unix trademark passed on its way to Xopen. And for some reason, when the OSF disappeared and gave all its assets to XOpen, he took the network number with him. So, so he claims that this is his network. The registration says it's the OSF's network, although the OSF doesn't exist anymore. It's actually XOpen's network, but of course XOpen has their own network, so they don't really care. And so it's wrong, but it's not clear what to do about it. So there's a lot of history. There's a lot of mess, but that's the worst level of what's going on with IP addresses. And as we switch over to IPv6. The issues basically are all the same, and the issue that's going to hit us most quickly about IPv6 is since IPv6 is a much longer address, it's much easier to hand out lots and lots and lots of allocations, and they're going to collide with the 100,000 limit much more quickly unless they try harder to avoid it. And there have also been some truly cement-headed suggestions. Like there was a paper floated through it was WSIS or WGIG. It's one of the ITU internet processes. They said, why don't we have each country hand out IP ranges just like they do phone numbers? To which the answer is no, 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 no. And there's two reasons. One is that particularly in highly integrated economies like they have in Europe, it's very common to have one network that's goes all over 6 countries in Europe, and who would you get it from? But the reason it's more of a problem is that as soon as you have a competitive market in allocations, then everything's going to go all to hell. And if you have some little country some little country grabs its big chunk of IP address space and it says, hey guys, come and buy IP space from us, all you want, no questions asked, which would happen. It would be, all of a sudden you'd have vast numbers of allocations that would be hard to route, and you wouldn't know who they belong to, and that would be unfortunate because the existing registries are all quite competently run. To some extent, in a few countries they delegate the allocations to an organization within the country, but it's still overseen by the regional registry, so that the effect is as although the regional registry was giving it out. So doing it by individual countries would be a bad idea, and I think everybody agrees that won't happen. But anyway, what's going on with IP addresses is fabulous and wonderful compared to the mess with domain names. Yes. Now with domain names, we all know what a domain name is. It's .co.uk or .com or .net or varieties of other dots that you might not have run into. And the problem is that the delegation of DNS goes in the opposite direction. With IP addresses, basically everybody knows what their IP address is, and the coordination is simply to make sure that they're all unique. And sort of each network is sort of out at the fringes of the internet, then sends information about what addresses they're using sort of inwards, so they can sort of compile one big database that actually each router has its own database. It's not done very efficiently. However, with DNS, there is the root. And since I'm a computer scientist, my trees are all in the southern hemisphere, so the root is here, and the leaves are down this way. So that there is an agreed root of the domain name system. So if this were say ox.ac.uk, okay, in the root, the root is a set of originally 12 servers spread around the world, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So to find out where on the net is Oxford, you ask the root, where is ox.ac.uk, and it'll say, I don't know, but ask that server that knows about .uk. So we go over to this server and say, okay, please will you tell me where is ox.ac.uk? And it'll say, well, I don't know either, but go and ask that server over at Janet, which will tell you about ac.uk. Okay, we ask this server and it says, ask it, okay, where's ox.ac.uk? And it says, I am authoritative for that zone. A zone is a chunk of the tree. And ox.ac.uk is found over here, and here's its IP addresses. So there's this multi-level delegation. And it was designed in the early 1980s, and it really works remarkably well. I mean, when the original internet was set up, it had hundreds, maybe thousands of domains. Now we have tens of millions. And having a database, because that's what this is, that is scaled from a few thousand domains to tens of millions of domains and still works, without any significant redesign really shows that the design was very, very sound. The problem is the politics of it. And let me check my notes here. Yes. So there are two issues about sort of to make sure that the DNS is stable. One is those 12 root servers. Originally, the 12 root servers were sort of rounded up as volunteers. One of them's at the University of Maryland in the U.S. One or two of them are at VeriSign, the company which has been running a lot of domains under contract for a long time. One of them is at the Internet Software Consortium in California. One of them is in Japan somewhere. I think one of them's here in England. But they're all run, the remarkable thing is they're all run by volunteers. And it's remarkable because these days running a root server is very expensive. The amount of network traffic, the number of requests that come in is enormous, many thousands per second. It turns out most of them are in fact due to bugs in Microsoft versions of Microsoft Windows, but there's nothing the root servers can do about that. It's true. So running a root server means you get enormous amounts of traffic. It means it's an enormous load on your network. The servers themselves have to be very large, sturdy, practically mainframe-style computers. They do all sorts of tricks so that even though in California there appears to be one server, in fact they have it set up so that there's about a dozen servers just there sharing a load, so that they're putting quite significant network and computational resources into providing this root service, and none of them have any contracts with anybody. It's just volunteers, which turns out to have been one of the great salvations of the net, because what it means that whenever somebody cruises by and says, well, I'm in charge now and we want you to do this, they can all say no, which they have had to do from time to time. The original root service, the servers are named A through J, and by convention, the set of domains, the master set of domains is collected at server A, and then it's copied out to all the other ones. So server A actually has a contract with it has a contract with ICANN, the organization that was set up to do all this stuff, of which I am a member of the at-large advisory committee, which means that we represent the entire world outside the internet industry, and we get to give them a great deal of good advice, none of which they take. I believe that's the role of all advisory committees, but in our case, it's particularly galling because I think our advice is really good. So the A server actually has a contract with ICANN, which has a contract with the United States Department of Commerce, and so that's the only contractual oversight of the internet. ICANN has been claiming for years that they're a grassroots, bottom-up, broad-based organization, which is why they have meetings in places that are extraordinarily expensive to get to. Luxembourg is a really easy one. The last one was in Mar del Plata, Argentina, which means you fly all the way to Buenos Aires, and then you take a bus for 6.5 hours through the Pampas, and then you end up at this tapped-out summer resort, which is why we were there. It was the off-season. It was cheap. Okay, and then they've met in Cape Town, which I gather is a lovely place, but is not convenient to 3/4 of the people in the world, and they've met in Ghana, which was, I'm sure, lovely, and they've met in, I don't know, Kuala Lumpur, someplace, actually, reasonable places if it's near. But wherever they meet, it's always a long way away, and it's someplace where there's practically nobody there anyway. Luxembourg is a perfectly fine neutral venue to have a meeting, but is it a hub of internet politics? Well, no. Quick, think of an important internet service in Luxembourg. Well, there is one. It's Skype, but it's convenient. It's a coincidence. I don't think Skype has any. I don't even think Skype is planning to show up at this meeting. So to return, so we have these 12 root servers, which fortunately, since B through J have no contract with anyone, they're all run by technologists. They all do a perfectly fine idea. Now, what are the domains that go into the root servers? They fall into two categories. The less contentious category are country domains, and outside of my country, which is .us, most domains in most countries, here in the UK it's .uk, and in France it's .fr, and in Mexico it's .mx, and for the remaining residents of Pitcairn it's .pn. Each country or country-like thing, and it turns out the International Organization for Standardization makes a list of country-like things. Has a two-letter code, and each one is delegated to, I forget what the word is, a relevant authority. Basically, it tends to be some technical organization that is looked on with favor by the government of the of the entity. So, in the U.S., it's a company called Neustar, which is well known to government telecom regulators because they happen to be the same company that maintain our equivalent of 0800, of the routing of the toll-free call. So they're well known to infrastructure bureaucrats. And in Korea, it's some national university, and in here I forget who it is. It's Nominet, that's right. But again, they're relatively non-controversial and they're politically well connected. Yeah. And now and then a country. Well, of course. Yes. Now and then a country's government will say we'll say change the country coordinator, and invariably the people maintaining the root servers, the table's actually created at IANA and handed to the A server. They always follow what the countries say, dating back 10 years when there was a competent group in Haiti running the Haitian domain, and then the Haitian government, for reasons that were widely believed to be corrupt, delegated some bunch of political cronies of theirs and who had no evidence of being able to run the Haitian domain. But they redelegated it anyway because they said, well, the Haitian government gets to make their own decisions. So this is a long list of country domains. They're basically fine. Then there are the familiar top-level domains like .com, .org, and .net, all of which are quite generic. There is .mil for the United States military. That's a historical one since they funded the original research. There's .gov, .gov. Again, that's the American government because they funded the original research. And there is .arpa, which was originally the name of which has a bunch of infrastructure stuff. And there's .int, which is for international treaty organizations like the United Nations and the Red Cross. Those are they all exist, they all work, they're all pretty good. Okay, but about 10 years ago, it simultaneously occurred to many, many tiny minds that if they could get their own personal domain into the roots, so instead of just being .com, it can be. Somebody said, if I can be .www and then I can sell .www addresses, I can make buckets of money, And this occurred to a whole lot of people at the same time, and so there was an enormous hue and cry about adding new domains, and of course, none of them were willing to admit that this was a pure money grab. So they all were talking about moving the net into the future and adding transparency and adding this and adding that, and at the time, the root servers were much less robust than they are now. And there are good technical reasons to think that if they had suddenly increased the number of names in the root is about 300. And if they had suddenly increased that to 3,000, the roots would have fallen over. So they said, well, we can't add an arbitrary number, so we need to come up with some way to figure out on what basis we will add new names in a measured and fair way. And that's basically where ICANN came in. They were chartered, the US government rounded up a bunch of alleged experts. They're all experts in something. Unfortunately, very few of them were experts in the internet. None of them were experts in politics. So they invented this organization called ICANN, which is supposed to oversee the operation of the internet. And they're supposed to come up with a transparent, fair process. And their process so far has been horrible. The first set of, they took a whole bunch of applications, and ICANN said, we're poor, so you need to send us a $50,000 non-refundable application fee for us to even consider your application. And, so the money grubbing had then continued. And there was a lot of yelling and screaming about that, but ICANN said, well, we don't have money from anywhere else, so sorry. So they did this, and they promptly approved .biz and .info, which are basically clones of .com for people who missed getting stuff the first time. So if you wanted to be joespub.com and you missed that, now you can be joespub.biz or you can be joespub.info. And there are vast numbers of biz and info domains registered. Most of them are really sleazy. In .info, thinking of the number of actual .info domains that I use, that I would, with websites that I would visit. The agency that runs the subway, the underground in New York City, uses mta.info, and the president of my church has a .info for her company, and that's kind of about it. All the rest is spammers. With biz, they're all spammers. So I'm sure that the companies running .info and .biz think it's a wonderful business. But in terms of advantages to the rest of the net, it's been pretty minimal. Now those were called generic top-level domains because anyone can apply. Okay, then they had some semi-generic top-level domains, which are, I guess these are considered these sponsored domains. One is .name. You can get, if your name is John Smith, you could get john.smith.name if, well, at least one John Smith could do that. If you have a very exotic name, then you can get, your name, first name dot last name dot name. And if you have a normal name, they have some way you can be Johns15.Smith or something like that. And this has been, for some reason, it's everybody I know with a .name address is in Germany. I guess the Germans all like to have their names right there on their email addresses. And that's been modestly successful. I think I would say it's an okay experiment. It hasn't really helped the net much. I'm sure that it's helped a certain number of people who want their own internet domains so you know just who they are. The other semi-sponsored thing is called .pro. .pro is supposed to be for professionals. The first 3 sets of professionals that they were going to register were doctors, lawyers, and accountants. And the idea is that to register in .pro, you actually have to show your license from the competent authority to get in, which is actually a good idea. So if I got mail from someone.md.pro, at least I know that that he actually is a doctor, or someone has verified his credentials as a doctor. So the first thing that happened to .pro is that they screwed up their business plan, and for 2 years nothing happened while they tried to raise money. And they had this website that said, "We will be registering soon." In about 2005, they said, "We're looking forward to taking registrations in early 2003." They finally fixed it. They finally opened it up. I do know a few lawyers with .pro. But then earlier this year, because the actual .pro registry then resells through other registrars. One of the registrars started speculating in .pro addresses. They started buying up .pro addresses based on, they had an employee who was a lawyer or something, and then reselling them. So, anybody who wants a .pro can have a .pro. Well, that kind of cheapens the product, don't you think? And so somebody pointed this out to ICANN at the meeting in Argentina in March, and ICANN's response was, "Wow! It never occurred to us that would happen. Oh, we should do something. We'll have our staff look into it." So next week in Luxembourg, we'll find out what the staff has concluded. And my guess is the staff will have concluded they should not have done that. And so we're going to say, "So what are you going to do about it?" And they say, "Oh, well, the staff are still looking into that." So the first problem is that ICANN has a governance process that can't actually govern. They can make decrees, and then if people don't obey basically they can delegate stuff to people. If the people to whom they are delegated don't do what they said they would, they have no enforcement process. The other things they did is they had sponsored domains for particular realms of endeavor. They had .coop for co-ops. They have .aero for the aeronautical industry, and they have what's the third one? .museum for museums. Now, I'm sure we all regularly visit .museum URLs every time we're looking for a local museum, don't we? Oh, well, yeah, neither does anyone else. All 3 of those have been complete failures. And although their sponsors insist that they're all around the corner from being glorious successes, but as an experiment, I happen to have a little 3-page website about buying airplane tickets that it started out as a weekly FAQ posting back when it was hard to buy airline tickets on the web. And it's evolved into this nice little 3-page website, and it has my opinions about various airlines websites. But it is, if ever there were something that screams, "Hi, I'm a hobbyist who has who doesn't really know much about this," that's my website. So I figured, can I get this into .aero? So I went to the .aero registrar, and there's these various categories. I said, I'm a member of the internet media. So I wrote and I said, "Hi, I'm a member of the internet media," because I have this 3-page website. And it took perhaps as long as an hour for them to say, "You're in." So, then it took another day to get my .aero. So you can go to so if you visit airinfo.aero, that's me. So but as the old joke says, if this club will let me in, then I don't want to join. And early on, .aero was very, very, very picky about who could get in, and they actually rejected some real travel journalists. A friend of mine in San Francisco named Ed Hasbrook is an absolutely no-kidding travel journalist. He writes for real magazines. He's written books about travel. He's written, He's run travel agencies. He's sold lots of airline tickets, and and when .aero was new, they said, "Well, Ed, you're not an airline. You're not an airport. You're not eligible." So they went. In maybe 2 years, they went from rejecting Ed, who was legitimate, to welcoming me, who was a scam. The reason they welcomed me was that I paid them $99 for a domain, and that's what this all boils down to. Is that each of these. I mean, the museum crowd might actually have thought they were being idealistic. Actually, the co-op people are all idealistic by nature, but most of these .aero, they thought it was going to be a big moneymaker for the airline industry. So, and the parade of suckers has not stopped. Earlier this year, ICANN, which they pride themselves on their opacity, but if you took, I don't know, if you backed up a truck full of India ink and squirted it all over the place, you could not come up with anything darker, murkier, or less comprehensible. I mean, the applications go in and they do something, and the results come out. So what they have most recently approved is they've approved .travel. Now, what's the difference between .aero and .travel? Because wouldn't most people in the airline industry also be in the travel industry? Well, it turns out the difference is that .aero is run by CETA, which is the organization that oversees basically the communication networks among the airlines use to communicate among themselves, and the IATA, which is the cartel that sets the airfares, was miffed because they thought they should have had .aero, so that there was some sort of backroom deal, and so that .travel was allocated to an odd little organization with no staff, no budget, no resources, but that is clearly a front for IATA. So basically, okay, IATA now has their .travel domain, which we are all convinced will be every bit as successful as .aero. So if you don't find .airinfo.aero, that's because I will have moved it to airinfo.travel. The mobile telephony business has arranged for .mobi, M-O-B-I, that will happen soon. I've asked them, what do you plan to put in .mobi? In particular, does this mean that every mobile phone will now have a corresponding email address in .mobi? So if my mobile phone number is 447812345678, will I now be 447812345678.mobi? Well, no. Well, then what are you planning to put there? I don't know. Yeah.
If I want to register a business company in England,
right,
I can register any name I want,
right,
provided it is not to do with royalty. I can't say the Princess Trust or something. I can't do that.
Right. The problem is that there are 6 of these. They have thousands of applications. They've only approved 6.
But if it isn't just put in a database, I mean, if I have a domain, myname.gurworth whatever.
Yeah.
Why should that matter? .com is nice, but all the obscure ones, as long as they don't duplicate. Well, actually,
you're getting ahead of me. I mean, the argument I'm going to make is that I can see why you would add no new domains because they're pointless. I can see why you would add unlimited numbers of new domains because they're cheap. What I don't understand is this process by which they are adding domains that are supposed to mean something but in fact don't. Yes, so .mobi is supposed to mean something about mobile telephony. We don't know what. And then the 2 that are going to cause them terrible trouble are .xxx and .cat. .xxx is for pornography. Catalonia. Yes, it's okay. The problem with .x, I talked to the guy who did .xxx, and given what a stupid idea it is, he really did a good job. He put together a board of directors that has a combination of pornographers, of bankers, because getting paid for online pornography is chronically difficult, and child protection organizations. Yeah, so basically, they're going to take the surplus from .xxx and donate it to protecting innocent children, which is noble, but they're going to do this, and but ICANN is so politically naive. Yes.
That may actually be useful because these naive filters that we have on so many libraries and so on.
Well, it's useful if what goes into .xxx is what you think belongs in .xxx.
Right. Let's say I want to have a porn site, and I don't want the wrong audience there. If I say XXX.
Oh yeah, that's the theory.
I'm not going to have a banking site.
No, you're not. However, no, there's two problems with .xxx. The first problem is that, particularly in the United States, where we have a lot of conspicuously religious politicians, that the political fallout for U.S. government contract agencies opens up the internet for pornography. It's not exactly true, but it's going to be very hard. But the political damage to ICANN is going to be enormous. Okay. The other problem is that once they've said that, then they're going to turn around and saying, well, now that we have .xxx, we're going to put all that bad stuff into .xxx, and the definition of bad varies quite a lot from one country to another. And certainly there are a lot of people in the United States who would like to put every reference to contraception and abortion into .xxx. And there are, and that's not the only country. So the point of saying, yes, you can use .xxx to filter, but now you'll be filtering out everything that someone thought should be in there. So that I think that, coming as I do from a country where we have constitutional guarantees of free speech, the urge for people to use .xxx as a way to circumvent these free speech guarantees, to say, well, yes, it's right there, but you can't get to it, but that's not our problem. I think, and again, ICANN, I said, don't you think this will be a problem? And what they're, what they're saying is, we know this is a tough decision, but we think that, people, I admire their bravery in making this tough decision, and I'm thinking, you can be brave and stupid at the same time, and I'm afraid that's what they're doing. So I think .xxx is going to have this simultaneously. They're going to get terrible political trouble for being pornographers, and they're going to get even more, which they don't really deserve. But they're going to get terrible political trouble, which they do deserve, for basically saying, by opening up a censorship zone, a black hole into which anything inconvenient will disappear and no one will be able to see it. So that's the real reason. And again, if .xxx were the 1,000th domain they had approved, it would be okay. But it's not. It's the 8th. Okay, and the final one they're about to approve is .cat for Catalonia. Well, that's fine, except that people and because it also in Catalonia, it's a wonderful region, and it also happens to have the advantage of being politically stable. And there's no serious argument that Barcelona wants to secede from Spain. I mean, not particularly. Okay, but that's fine. Okay, now we have .cat. Okay, now that the next two applications, Ada is going to apply for .basque. And and some bunch of okay, well, Quebec. Yes. Well, but Quebec, but French though. That's French. Well, yeah, it's French Canadian, ethnically different from France. I'll have to get back to you on that. Okay, but okay, we're going to have .kurd. Imagine there are a lot of linguistic minorities for whom recognition is a political issue. And as far as I can tell, nobody at ICANN has thought about this at all. One of the things I would ask them, would say, if Ada applied for .basque, what would you say? On what basis? They clearly represent some fraction of the Basque community. And on what basis? On what basis can you give .cat to a group of Catalan speakers, and not give .basque to a bunch of Basque speakers? And when .kurd comes in, okay, what are you going to do about that? And if you get 3 applications for .kurd from Iraq, Syria, and whatever the third country, Turkey, right? Okay, oh yeah, we're going to 4 applications, right, from Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. Okay, which one are we going to take? Are we going to say, well, why don't you guys just all get together? Yes. Well, I think they're hoping that you'll. I hope that you'll. Well, but would you be .scot, or would they say, well, wouldn't you be a bit more appropriate for you to apply for .gael along with Ireland and Brittany? Well, I don't know. Neither do they.
Have they announced the .com thing yet?
If they haven't announced it, they will next week, because apparently the contract negotiations are all done. It's ready to go. Yeah. So. Since my time is running short, the point of going through these domains is that ICANN has a horrendously broken process, and I could if you want, I can go through about eye-rolling stupidity with things the board does and doesn't do. But the main thing is that it's an organization that's fundamentally dysfunctional, and they've attempted to reform themselves, and it's only made it worse. And and last week the United States government put out, the Department of Commerce, with whom they are contracting, put out a one-page note on their website, which shocked ICANN, but didn't shock anybody else. Where ICANN had been saying for a long time, well, it's just a matter of time before the U.S. government cuts us loose, and we are our own sort of independent authority. And the statement on the Commerce website said in suitable bureaucratese, we ain't never going to cut them loose. We're perfectly happy to let them coordinate the IP addresses, but we plan to maintain our oversight role indefinitely, which, given what a bunch of screw-ups ICANN is the only thing they could reasonably do. And it's kind of surprising that they should choose to reiterate it now rather than some other time.
Most U.S. government agencies don't have their own foreign policy.
Well, remember, ICANN is a nonprofit corporation incorporated in California. This is not a foreign policy. This is merely their relationships with a domestic contractor. Yes. Now, the question say, how can ICANN simultaneously be a world-girdling, bottom-up, consensus-based international organization and a California nonprofit? And I don't know either. I mean, I don't know why they didn't start by incorporating as a Swiss international corporation or something neutral like that. So anyway, so what's going to happen in the future? I mean, ICANN's going to be something's going to happen to ICANN. My guess is that they're so badly mismanaged, they're constantly running out of money. So I think they might actually declare bankruptcy and have most of what they do thrown away, which would be fine, and be reconstituted in a much smaller form. The IP addresses, they're fine. That's essentially a technical issue. And with the domain names, I mean, again, the only thing I see faintly plausible is, one is the direction to say, fine, whatever domains we have, and those are enough. And the other is to say, anybody who comes in and can pass minimum technical and financial requirements can get in, like registering a corporation, which I think makes more sense, because whatever limits there might have been on the number of top-level domains, whatever technical limits there might have been is long since gone. And the other thing is that the parade of fools who think they will make big bucks with domains will never stop, because the people who did .biz actually did make some money, so, and maybe you never know, .xxx might actually make some money, because there's definitely a lot of money in pornography, and the pornographers are quite aware that putting themselves in .xxx will give them political cover against some kinds of censorship. So we'll have lots and lots of domains, I think most of which will be sleazy ripoffs of .com. You heard it here first. Now, oh yes, and ICANN wants more domains because they get a 25 cent per registration fee, and they need the money. So that's...
Does that roll over every year, or just...
It's 25 cents per domain per year, right? So yeah, register more domains. The more top-level domains they have, the more, like, oh yes, another question I've been needing to ask, who gets Disney.xxx? Yeah, so there's another domain coming up called .jobs, where the idea is if you're for the human resources industry, like if you're something.co.uk, if you can get that same something.jobs and give people immediate access to your list of vacancies. So and it can be any top-level domain you want. So I looked around and I found there's some vanity in the Tonga domain. So I wanted to register blow.to, and then apply to .jobs for the analogous name and see what they say. They say, what are you planning to do with it? Compiler jobs. Because compiler jobs, goes all over the world. I'll make up some excuse, but I don't think they may have some plan, but I think it's like there's no process for even identifying and resolving problems. It's just one of these stupid things after another. So in my last 8 minutes before I try and leave a little time for questions, now I've entirely been talking about governance of the internet itself, like the domain names and the IP addresses. But what I actually spend a lot of time, I'm just writing books. I've just done the revisions for the 10th edition of Internet for Dummies. And the first edition, it's 380 pages. And about the first 300 pages were getting your computer hooked up to the network. And the last 80 pages were what can you do once you get there. Today, the first 3 pages are getting your computer hooked up to the network. Like the advice in England is, oh, don't waste time. Just call up BT and get broadband. Or whoever else. But Tesco, I guess, has a special on it this week. But getting hooked up is just the first few pages, and the whole rest of the book is what you can do on the net. And a lot of it is talking about there's wonderful resources, and here's museums, and here's how you can buy stuff, and here's how you can find your friends, and here's how you can chat. And then the other half of the book is, well, if you get email from someone you don't know and it purports to be this, then here's how you deal with this kind of scam. Here's how you deal with this kind of threat. Here's what you do if you buy stuff and it doesn't get delivered. I mean, it's turned into a less than fabulous neighborhood, And this is where my not being the network policeman starts to become much more of an issue. Because with the people who write to Mr. AbuseNet, I mean, they're not writing and saying, this person is abusing his IP address. They write to me and they say, this person is, he's selling fake Viagra. I'm sure that his website has child pornography on it. Let's see. Yes, I'm pretty sure that nobody in Nigeria has $20 million they want to lend me. But the scams are scams. The criminality has nothing to do with it being on the internet. The internet is simply the way they present it to me. So, and there has been, for a long time, at least in the U.S., there's been this idea of, well, the internet it transcends national boundaries, and it's actually cyberspace. But cyberspace isn't reality. Cyberspace is like it's a metaphor. Metaphors aren't real. They're metaphors, and they perhaps enlighten our view of reality, but they are not reality. So what is the reality? The reality is that every computer attached to the internet is somewhere. Unless you believe in places like Sealand, every somewhere is basically everybody of the internet is somewhere, and it is somewhere on dry land. I mean, the number of web servers floating around on ships is negligible. So that, well, it's the satellite bandwidth will kill you. I suppose you could have a drop down to a cable, but
Sealand is supposedly a great server side, or is that just?
It was. It turned out it wasn't. His connectivity wasn't as great as he thought, and I think Sir Roy got distracted or something. Because I actually knew somebody who located servers there. I think it rapidly became apparent that Sealand would last exactly until it became an annoyance to the British government, and then as long as it took to send some Marines out to capture it again, which is what, half an hour. But every internet server is somewhere. They're all subject to various national laws, and what's happened now is that it seems like it has no boundaries just because the way that applications have been built to date makes it relatively difficult to tell where a message is coming from, where a website is. So what I do see is a lot of, particularly, I do a lot of anti-spam work. I see a lot of work. Fighting spam directly is actually quite difficult because it's armor plate and armor piercing shells. Any technical trick you do, they'll work around. But what I do see though is that the spam I'm seeing is it's criminal. They're selling fake drugs, which just isn't legal, or they're doing the Norwegian 419 scam. I believe was actually invented here in Britain in the 1600s when it was the Spanish prisoner scam. And it's these things are fundamentally illegal. So No, Nigeria.
Very similar. It's an easy mistake to make.
Yeah, easily confused.
They said it was lutefisk, but actually. What we will be seeing is somewhat better authentication. So when you get email that purports to be from your bank, it'll be easier to tell whether it's actually from your bank or whether it's from an enterprising 14-year-old in Glasgow with some spare time. And but the point here is basically it's not so much to invent a new political reality. It's simply to align the internet with the political reality that's already there. If you're here in England, you are subject to English law, and it doesn't really matter whether your packets are bouncing off some server in Sealand or in China. You're subject to English law, and also for a long time, there was a perception among less developed countries that this will level the playing field, and now we can play with the big boys, so we don't want any sort of regulation. When I was at the ITU cybersecurity meeting last week, and the little countries are all saying the scams are horrible. The spam is bankrupting us because we have these expensive things. We want you to fix it. So there is now an international consensus that we need harmonized international laws about cybercrime. And but technically it's so like here I am in the U.S., you know, and I see some sort of scam on a server that appears to be, in England is actually very easy, because there are the American Federal Trade Commission and their English equivalents have a formal memorandum of understanding. So basically, if I report it to the FTC can then call up their parallel number here in the UK, and they have the existing structures in place that they can ask the guy, and they can ask the UK authorities to impound the data pending getting these suitable legal paperwork. And works great in England, works less well in France and Germany just because of the language problems. Doesn't work at all in Korea. Yeah.
Would you say it works a little too well here, with the FBI calling England to impound a server in the media because Italy doesn't like a picture? Nothing to do with spam, but apparently it's crime prevention, and all these agreements are being used as mosques for political agendas.
It may well be happening here. Doing that kind of activity in the U.S. is illegal enough, and the FTC, fortunately, is non-political enough. It may well be going from Italy to here.
No, it went by the FBI a couple of months ago. Last week there was another story. I don't know the details, but basically it was a picture of an undercover cop in Italy doing a demonstration on a website with anarchists. So that the government in Italy, they said, hey, this could put us in jeopardy. So they called the FBI. Who would then call the British authorities and impounded that server.
The FBI is. I think it's because the FBI is naive. Yeah. I mean, there are some FBI agents who know all about cybercrime, but they are, it's like they're used to chasing bank robbers, and they're used to chasing bank robbers. They're used to chasing spies working for large countries. And so yeah, I believe it happened. I think as likely as not, it was a screw up, and once the FBI people knew what was going on, I would hope that they would try and not do that again. But yeah, there's no question. Whenever you have better provisions for exchange of information, it can be used for bad purposes as well as for good purposes. However, I mean, I think the reality is that there is enough clearly criminal activity that's happening across national boundaries. I think a lot of it is happening across close national boundaries. There's a lot of stuff that just goes back and forth between the U.S. and Canada. And there's no, part of the problem there is that the FBI, clearly what the FBI should have said: if you have a problem with England, you call England. And so this needs to be worked out. But my basic message here is that the law of cyberspace is the law of physical space. And there are minor changes because the communication is faster and cheaper, but I think it ain't really all that different. So it's been an hour. I will stop, but I would be happy to take a few questions.